Dear Secretary General, dear Commissioner, distinguished ambassadors, members of delegations, experts, dear colleagues, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this event on the intersectionality of gender and national minorities. This event has been jointly organized by the High Commissioner of National Minorities and the Gender Issues Program WIN project. And I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the High Commissioner of National Minorities and his staff for the excellent cooperation and partnership to make this event possible. This is the first time ever that this important topic is on the OEC agenda. And today we have with us a number of experts to discuss the situation of national minority women in the OEC region, and more specifically, the intersections of gender equality and national minorities. We will have discussions today based on a research that was commissioned by WIN and the High Commissioner of National Minorities that will be presented today, this morning. And today, in today's discussion, we will assess and look at the key challenges that are faced by women from a minority background. And our experts will present some examples of good practices in the promotion of full and equal participation of minority women in public life and in countering discrimination. We will also have the chance to dive into different thematic areas where the double discrimination, this is being a woman and being a member of a minority group, limits opportunities and access for a large section of the population in the OEC region. We will also focus in particular on minority women and girls living in rural areas. They face increased risk of exposure to violence and discrimination, as well as barriers in accessing their social, economic, and political rights. And we will hear more about this and how the OEC can improve the situation of national minority women from our excellent panel of speakers later on. But first, it is my great honor to welcome and pass the floor to the OEC Secretary General, Helga Maria Smith, for her opening remark. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Lara. Good morning. Very warm welcome to the dear High Commissioner. Of course, very warm welcome to the representative of the media, dear Teresa, dear ambassadors, experts, and colleagues. I'm very delighted to formally open this very important event on how we can better address the intersectionality of gender and national minorities. Inclusive societies foster peace and stability. And it's also clear that societies are not truly inclusive unless they offer equal opportunities for all. Gender-based discrimination is an obstacle to achieving equal opportunities, and so is stigmatization of national minorities. And this is exactly why applying an intersectional approach, as Lara was explaining, is so crucial. Too often, women belonging to national minorities are marginalized and they are subjected to discrimination. Discrimination can be traced in almost every aspect of our lives. In laws, in regulations, in access to services, in social norms, and also in participation in public life. Women from minorities face discrimination also in the economic sphere. They are more likely to be engaged in informal labor, and this means they're not covered by social protection measures. Minority women are highly affected during conflicts, but they are severely underrepresented in conflict resolution and in peace building. This is just not acceptable. Gender inequality and discrimination cannot continue to affect minority women across their entire lives. Concrete measures are needed to achieve equality for all. We need to listen to women's voices and work together to create inclusive policies and programs that address their requirements and their demands. We need to protect and we need to promote the rights of women belonging to national minorities, and we need to encourage their full participation in society. This should be a collective effort to recognize that national minority women face unique challenges and obstacles which must be addressed. However, the lack of comprehensive research on the intersectionality of gender and minority status in the OSCE area remains a challenge for evidence-based policymaking. And this is why, together with the OSCE's High Commissioner on National Minorities, our Gender Issues Program is commissioned an in-depth research on this topic. This new research looks at the experiences of minority women in three specific thematic areas. First, minority women's participation in political and public life. Second, minority women's access to economic and social rights. And third, participation of minority women in peace and security. Our event will reflect on these findings and provide an opportunity to discuss recommendations to achieve equality for minority women. As you all know, one of my objectives is the whole of the OSCE approach. And I know this is very much shared by the High Commissioner, by Kairat, by Teresa Ribeiro. And this is why I'm very pleased that the close cooperation between the Secretariat and the Office of the High Commissioner on National Minorities has enabled us to make good progress on this area. And I would like to thank the High Commissioner and the Gender Issues Program for their good efforts in this respect, because the research we present today is an important step towards improving the lives of women in the OSCE area. I would also like to thank the donors of our multi-year extra budgetary WIN project. It's your investment that has allowed us to invest in strategic, innovative research and analysis of key underexplored areas of gender and its impact on comprehensive security. To achieve progress, we need change. I truly hope that today's discussion will serve as a platform for an exchange of ideas and collaboration towards a more just and equitable future for national minority women in the OSCE region. And this will benefit the whole of society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, for highlighting the importance of the linkage between gender equality and national minorities and what we can do as OSCE to promote women inclusion and address discrimination. It is now my great pleasure to welcome and pass the floor to the High Commissioner on National Minorities. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Many thanks to Secretary General, to my dear friend Helga, for her opening statement. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome all of you to this event that is dedicated to unveiling the findings of the above-mentioned research, and which is based on cooperation between my office and the OSCE Secretariat's program on gender issues. Taking this opportunity, I wish to thank Secretary General and your team for their support to this research and for graciously co-hosting our event today. My gratitude also go to the delegation, namely of Ireland, which has contributed funding to this project, complementing support provided as part of the above-mentioned Secretariat's WIN project. I also want to thank everyone who was involved in this research, a number of whom are present with us today. And of course, my sincere thanks to all of you for coming these early hours to Holbrook. Later on, during the panel discussion, participants and our partners will share their valuable reflections on the research findings with us. I also appreciate the work of my very able and excellent team of HCNM, and the gender focal points within my own institution. I look forward to today's discussions and hope that they will be thought-provoking, insightful, and lead to meaningful impact on the ground. First, let me begin by telling you how this research study came about, gender equality, and in particular, looking at the issues of national minorities with a gender lens has been one of the priorities of my work, also since the, if you remember, the selection of candidates for that position of High Commission, and there were several questions with regard to gender during Q&A sessions, and that's why this was a sort of task which I received at time. Over the course of time, however, we stumbled upon a scarcity of comprehensive data and information on intersectionality matters that could inform my recommendations to participating states. We then realized that efforts to empower minority women in peace and security would be stifled without a deeper understanding of the root causes of inequality and multiple forms of discrimination that minority women seemed, according at least to some evidences, to be facing. These considerations is what motivated me to take the initiative to launch a comprehensive research study that the intersectionality of matters affecting national minorities. I am delighted to confirm with you and that today we're approaching the finishing line of this very ambitious project. It is the conclusion of a phase that will hopefully generate new beginnings in terms of not only my office's and OEC's attention to issues related to national minorities and gender, but also that of participating states and of your governments. Moving to the more specific scope of the research, as our lead consultant will explain later, we collect data on the specific situation of minority women. Due to their gender and ethnicity, minority women often experience multiple forms of discrimination. This study was based on field research carried out in sample countries, including Estonia, Georgia, Montenegro, and the Kyrgyz Republic, and complements earlier work conducted in Ukraine. It focuses on identifying common challenges, seeking good practices, and formulating a baseline analysis with a view to offering a set of recommendations to the OEC participating states. Our research focused on three main areas: the participation of minority women in political and public life, their access to economic and social rights, and their ability to participate in peace and security processes. As you will hear later on, the research findings indicate that certain minority groups are at particular risk of marginalization and discrimination. Another important finding of the study is that factors other than ethnicity have an equal impact on opportunities. These include the socioeconomic status, in particular, we're talking about poverty levels of women, the rural-urban divide, and how accessible basic social services and education are to minority women in these areas. While official data to assess minority women's political participation or their participation in peace and security processes is scarce, the research shows that engagement in civil society is usually one of the key avenues minority women have to access political life and peace and security efforts, and as such should be capitalized upon. Based on our research findings, it's apparent that increasing opportunities in education sector, including access to quality, and I stress official language teaching for minority girls and women, is one of the key strategies participating states have in their disposal to tackle both discrimination issues as well as to boost the empowerment of minority women. Providing safe access to quality education increases their chances of accessing other opportunities in employment and in public and political life. To this end, I would like to remind you that the very first thematic recommendations developed by institution of High Commissioner were the Hague recommendations regarding the education rights of national minorities. This set of recommendations recognizes how important the right of to education is in order to national minority to integrate into a broader society. When we advise participating states on how best to integrate diverse societies, we recognize that language plays a very important role in this. I therefore continuously advocate for multilingual education because it preserves the identity of minority communities, yet allows them to integrate into the wider society. The recommendations of my institution recognize the right to learn in own mother tongue, but at the same time, underscore the responsibility to learn the state language in order to participate fully in society and to be included in all aspects of it. My office continues its efforts to provide assistance to governments in order to help them develop policies and capacity for implementing above-mentioned multilingual education. Multilingual education not only increases the quality of education, it also increases the number of youth, especially girls, entering higher education. Women with a higher education have a higher earning potential, and this in turn increases their socioeconomic opportunities as well as their ability to participate in public life. Distinguished guests, today the importance of ensuring the representation of women at all decision-making levels in national, regional, international institutions, as well as in mechanisms for prevention, management, and resolution of conflict, has been identified and recognized. For example, of these, the UN Security Council has adopted resolutions on women, peace, and security, starting with 1325. It was 23 years ago, and many others that came after. Together, they form the international policy framework with obligations that extend from the international to national level. They provide guidance on work to promote and protect the rights of women in both conflict and post-conflict situations. Although all 9 sets of recommendations published by the Office of High Commissioner have a broader scope than that, they tend to look at these issues primarily with national minorities as a whole in mind. Nevertheless, we keep gender issues, especially the women, peace, and security agenda, very close to our hearts. Therefore, in my statement today, I'm talking about contribution of my institution to gender mainstreaming and furthering the women, peace, and security agenda in the past 3 decades. As you may know, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the HCNM in The Hague. Undoubtedly, the global community has recognized the importance and the need to further women's role in peace and security processes. What I want to emphasize today is that it all starts with an opportunity. Peace and security can only be achieved if all members in society have equal opportunities. Therefore, I want to focus on what my institution is doing to create such opportunities and how we are working to encourage the 57 OEC participating states to increase opportunities for women, especially women and girls from national minorities. The work of each successive High Commissioner on National Minorities is to act as an instrument of conflict prevention by guiding the 57 participating states and helping them to create equal opportunities for all, including national minorities. I do this work using the collection of guidelines and recommendations developed by consecutive High Commissioners on National Minorities over the years. These guidelines and recommendations provide advice to participating states on how minorities can be integrated into all aspects of society in order to increase cohesion and strengthen the society from within. So far, successive High Commissioners have produced a total, I already mentioned its number, 9 sets of recommendations of specific thematic issues. They cover a wide range of issues from education, linguistic rights, and the effective participation of minorities in public life, to the use of languages in media, policing, access to justice, integration, interstate relations, and the media. All these recommendations focus on national minorities, obviously. This year, my office will unveil the 10th set of recommendations. They will offer advice on how to stimulate the social and economic participation of national minorities in public life. These latest guidelines compile the knowledge and experience gained through the ongoing programmatic work of successive High Commissioners during the past 30 years. We have distilled this knowledge into relevant recommendations on how to create equal, inclusive social and economic opportunities for all, including national minorities. And I look forward to sharing them with you in due course at least before expiring of my mandate. I want to note that when we speak of inclusion and participation, this is not restricted to ethnicity. Gender is a fundamental element of this process too. While women lag behind in most spheres of public life, in the case of minority women, gender intersects with other identity markers such as ethnicity and language. This means that we are dealing with a very specific multi-layered identity, which may be associated with a very different range of needs and experiences compared to those of minority men, or even compared to those of women belonging to the ethnic majority. Minority women may face multiple intersecting forms of discrimination based on both their gender and or their ethnicity markers. Over the course of the past few years, my predecessors and I have become increasingly aware of the importance of understanding these dynamics. At the same time, in the search for information and analysis that could guide our gender mainstreaming efforts, we realize how little we know and actually how little the international academic community knows about the specific topics. The lack of gender disaggregated data within government structures, combined with shortcomings in ethnicity-based data, has been a key challenge to this respect. Same time, there is also a scarcity of qualitative research that look at this issue in a comprehensive manner and form a security perspective, especially in the geographic region that we cover. This is why we initiated this study and tried to address this information gap by taking proactive measures in an attempt to close this gap. I hope that today's discussion will do exactly that. Raise awareness of the issue, give us a moment to reflect on how we address the challenges that are common to all of us, and to provide an opportunity for us to discuss how different participating states are dealing with these issues. Ultimately, it is through this powerful exchange that we will learn from each other. I'm sorry for taking up too much of your time. I thank you for your kind attention. Looking forward to our above mentioned thought-provoking discussions and exchange. Thank you.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for highlighting the importance of gender mainstreaming in your work, and also for the really wonderful cooperation between the two teams. It is now my pleasure to welcome and give the floor to the representative of the OSCE chairmanship North Macedonia, Adelina Marcu. North Macedonia has placed gender equality firmly on the agenda among their priorities, and therefore we would be very happy to hear from you, from your perspectives, on the topic of gender equality and national minority. Adelina, thank you very much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Lara. I cherish your work. I'm happy to be in this table. Dear Excellencies, Mr. Abdrakamov, Madam Helga, dear Lara, friends, colleagues. Working closely with the OSCE this year, I have recognized the strong organizational culture the OSCE has. This culture lives through its attributes, naming respect, trust, integrity, change, adaptability, teamwork, result-oriented organization, responsibility, accountability, meaning, purpose, communication, decision-making, and goals. This is a culture that drives success. And success is also defined as a capability to understand the other. Thus, the idea of intersectionality is a vital component of OSCE's success. Revisiting it helps us improve our understanding of different experiences and liberate ourselves, our societies. Once we become able to name the ways you experience privilege and the ways in which others face obstacles based on perceived bias, you are ready to really create a momentum of change. But this momentum of change can evaporate easily if societies are not able to institutionalize it. This can happen only if society have the capability to learn from its mistakes. The momentum of change is not just a simple terminology or a discovery of leadership schools. It is indeed a very difficult task to reach, maintain, and upgrade in order to create a normal political and social discourse in a society. I am pleased to be one of the voices in this event. I want to help Gorica to inform me and to prepare me also for this event. She is our colleague responsible for gender in our CIO. And as I said, I'm pleased to be one of the voices in this event, as also I represent an example or a product of understanding the complexity and at the same time the power of compounded totality, intersectionality of gender and national minorities, in our case, ethnic minorities, can bring to one's society. Dear Excellencies, dear colleagues, the OSCE has played an important role in promoting the rights of all people, from all communities and groups, without discrimination based on their gender. The organization, our organization, as a regional one, is committed to promoting and supporting work on women, peace and security under Chapter 8 of the UN Charter and to meeting the 2004 OSCE Action Plan for the promotion of gender equality and other related commitments. In this decision, participating states are asked to take all necessary measures to promote equality in rights and full and equal participation in society to prevent violence against women. The aim being to promote the practice of gender equality and gender mainstreaming. All OSCE executive structures, as we see, are tasked to support this work. The High Commissioner on National Minorities is tasked to address specific issues relating to the participation in public and private life of women belonging to national minorities. Dear colleagues, earlier research provided some evidence that we are going to see, will provide evidence that women and girls from national minorities face a particular set of challenges. To illustrate, women from an ethnic or religious minority are less likely than women on average to report that they have experienced intimate partner, physical and or sexual violence. They were also more likely to hold victim-blaming attitudes or believe that violence is a private matter and may therefore be less willing to disclose their experiences of violence. They also face barriers to reporting violence and fear that they would be treated differently by, for example, medical staff in the case. However, when they did speak out about this, they report more severe consequences from the violence experienced. Women from national minorities may also face additional barriers to their full, equal, and meaningful participation in society. For example, discrimination and marginalization of women and girls may reduce access to education, provide fewer opportunities to achieve economic empowerment, and they may be less able to fully participate in democratic institutions and decision-making within their society. As Madame Helga mentioned, this is an example of stigma. Gender is indeed a priority for the chairpersonship of North Macedonia. It's about people, we say. And this is OSCE Chair's comprehensive motto. inclusive for all people and perspectives. We aim to work on gender as a cross-dimensional theme. In the first dimension, pressing for the full implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. In the second, addressing women's economic empowerment, including the impact of corruption. And in the third, ensuring the OSCE can tackle all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls, as well as striving for women's equal participation in public and political life. I note that High Commissioner National Minorities' commitment to mainstream gender through all aspects of their work and the specific emphasis on the links to the conflict prevention mandate. Women taking a full role in society is an important contribution to prevent conflict. And there is growing evidence that women's involvement in all aspects of conflict management, especially, produces more sustainable solutions. Intersectionality is indeed an analytical tool used in equality and human rights monitoring to show the distinct forms of harm, abuse, discrimination, and disadvantage experienced by people when multiple categories of social identity interact with each other. It is extremely positive that this meeting will address the intersectionality between the challenges facing national minorities and the specific issues faced by women and girls. To conclude, the research that will be presented today, conducted jointly by HCNM and the Secretary General's Gender Issue Program WIN project that we have the pleasure to work closely with, will help fill an essential gap in our understanding. This is an excellent example of the importance of cooperation and synergies between OSCE institutions. We welcome the recommendations and hope that they will help the participating states, the OSCE, and its institutions to frame appropriate responses. I'm using this opportunity to thank my wonderful woman team in the chairpersonship, Gorica and Martina, who helped me do this speech. And I also invite you, in case we have later on some more time, to ask us about the plans, especially on organizing the Women Conference in North Macedonia. And I'm sure that Gorica will have more answers for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adelina, for being with us, for setting the scene and for reaffirming the strong commitment to gender equality and women participation in all aspects of public life. It is now my pleasure to move to our first external speaker. We have with us Rina Pilke, our lead researcher for the project, who will present the main findings of the baseline study that was commissioned by the High Commissioner on National Minorities and the Gender Issue Program WIN project. Dr. Pilke is a Finnish expert based in Kyrgyzstan, the lead researcher of the study today. He has an extensive experience in working in international relations, development, gender equality, children and disability rights. Specialized in international development, poverty and inequality, she holds a PhD in economic sociology and a master's in cultural anthropology. Thank you, Rina, for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introductions, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Secretary General, High Commissioner. Thank you very much for having me here today. I have a PowerPoint presentation, which is coming on now. So what we have heard in the opening speeches is already a good snapshot of the study findings here. Just to say, to begin by saying that we were a team of 3 people conducting this research: myself, my colleague, Dr. Eugenia Ganea, and Mr. Ruslan Asadulin. And let's see how this works. Here we go. I'm going too fast, sorry. No,
Maybe
wrong
return.
direction.
Yeah, just return. I do that all the time.
Yes. So I begin by saying a few words about the scope and the approach of the study, after which I summarize the key findings and then finalize with a few recommendations that we thought are the priority action coming out from our research data. So as has been said before, this study is very much the continuation of the work that is already ongoing in the OEC family. And it is a follow-up of a pilot study that was conducted in Ukraine, I believe in 21. As also heard before, we had 2 specific thematic focus areas as a distinct areas to look at, and that was minority women's political participation and minority women in peace and security. And as a third and sort of cross-cutting element, we looked at minority women's economic and social rights, which we thought that forms the foundation for all the rest in life. Our approach was horizontal, meaning that we did not have predetermined minority groups that we wanted to look at. Instead, we began by looking at national statistics on minority groups within the countries, and then from there used snowball technique, contacting civil society organizations, international organizations, politicians and individuals, and asked them to participate in our study. We had interviewees from both urban and rural communities, but the emphasis was in urban settings, and the reason is very practical. We did not have very much resources to do extensive field work within the countries that we focused on. As also heard, we had 4 sample countries: Estonia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, and Montenegro, which are very different countries, but which were thought to give a sort of snapshot of different realities of minority women. And it's important to stress here that our study was in no way comparative study, but rather a scoping study on the situation of minority women. Our approach was qualitative. We focused on identifying the different situations and the reasons for them, i.e. what impact being a minority representative has in a woman's life. So let's see, this is a test if I go to right direction. Yes. So why to study minority women in general, and what are the challenges for this kind of research? We started from the premises that minority women indeed face multiple and intersectional discrimination and are excluded from public spheres, but we had a few challenges also conducting this study. Firstly, there is very little information available about the situation of minority women specifically. There are no national statistics available, and there are some existing studies, but they are limited in number and scattered in different organizations. And this is definitely not a structured, organized research discipline. Secondly, both identity and discrimination are very personal experiences. It's one's individual freedom to choose to identify as a representative of a minority or not. In similar vein, what constitutes as discrimination to one person is not necessarily the same experience to another. So there is always this element of subjectivity to these kinds of social studies. And therefore, it's also quite hard to quantify or generalize any results. Thirdly, minority groups are often quite closed communities. So it is a challenge to find people that are willing to talk to you. So ideally, these kinds of studies would be longer term partnerships where you have time to build a relationship with your interviewees, but time is, of course, often a luxury that we don't have, and that was the case for our study as well. Moving on to findings then. In general, we can state without a doubt that minority women's participation in politics or any type of public decision making continues to be very low. But I am saying this with the best estimate based on the research data we collected. There are no statistics on this. Political parties do not keep records, and governments do not disaggregate data on the basis of minority or gender. Well, gender, yes, but not combining the two. Women's and minority women's participation in peace and security processes is very low in the sample countries. And in fact, we struggled a lot finding good examples on this. And one of the reasons, not the only one, but one of the reasons for especially this low participation in peace and security is that often these types of initiatives have been a donor-led agenda. And that means that it's program-based, it's project-based, and when the programs end, they have not necessarily had time to be rooted in the communities. So eventually also the initiatives die out. Second reason, and definitely not the lowest reason or minor reason here, is poverty. Poverty is higher among some minority women, and particularly senior minority women. But again here, this is by no means a universal truth. It really depends on the minority group, and there are also minorities that are very well off in the societies. But where poverty prevails, it is usually because of lower job or economic opportunities, which is because limited or a lack of skills, of prejudices in working with or employing some minorities, and because of corruption and high share of informal economies. And as we all know, women are overrepresented in service sector, which is a volatile sector by nature. This means that women, including minority women, often have no job security, no benefits, and of course, that affects one's opportunities also in decision-making structures, or not to mention peace and security. We also found that at least in the sample countries that we looked at, there is no special protection for minority women by legislative means. Constitutions usually prohibit discrimination, but this is generally, and minority women are not considered as a special group in need of protection by law in any of the countries that we looked at. And I dare make the generalization that this probably is the case in most countries. Perhaps my key message today here, based on our research findings, is that situations of minority women are really unique. So there are no universal truths, and it's very dangerous to make any kind of generalizations on this issue. But if my arm is really twisted and I need to mention a couple of common factors, a red thread that we found applying to most of the countries that we looked at one way or another, that would be firstly that minority women's access to public services and structures is hampered because of not speaking the majority language, because information is not provided in minority languages. And this is not a new discovery in any way. We can't take credit for that. We have known this, but our study certainly reconfirmed this issue. And even if women would speak the language, interestingly, what we also found was that it requires quite a lot of skills to navigate in different administrative systems that are often so complicated that in practice, women are left out from them. Second factor here is the urban-rural divide, which really plays a major role. As we know, in many countries, services continue to be concentrated in major cities, which means that minority women in rural communities do not benefit from them, or this applies also to minority women in informal settlements in cities. So language and this urban-rural divide, how do they then affect minority women? Well, simply put, throughout the lifespan of a woman. It starts from maternal and newborn care. Often minority women do not have these services available, especially in rural areas. The same applies to early childhood education and social protection and social security, as I mentioned before already. When it comes to education, primary, secondary, higher education, in most countries, and especially the countries that we looked at, for most minorities, primary education is available. This is not true to all groups, but for most of them, yes. However, the point that I want to make here is that in the education path of a girl and young woman, there are many sort of risky points during which there is a high risk of school dropouts. So the higher you move in the education system, the less likely you are to find minority women and girls. This, of course, affects on employment opportunities and competitiveness in the job markets, especially in the formal sector. And then at the top of the pyramid, to say, to me, is public decision-making structures and peace and security structures, which is a traditionally very male-led structure anyways. So if all these first elements do not materialize, it is quite difficult to find minority women in politics, in public decision-making, or in formal peace and security structures. Then if we look at the cultural factors that fuel exclusion of minority women and come from within the groups, we found that early marriages is still very common, and it's a major problem because girls' education is not considered necessary or useful. They are assumed to take care of the families and marry young. Age stratification as well continues to be very strong within many minority groups. And young persons, especially girls' opinions, are not considered important. They are not asked their opinions. And one good example that we found in quite many groups that we spoke to was the practice that male members of the families take decisions and vote on behalf of the whole family for the benefit of the community. So girls' and women's political voices are sort of shut already at that family level in many communities. Another important issue is trust in so many levels. We found out also that many minorities do not have trust in their governments. They do not have trust in other groups in the society. So there is this tendency to look inwards rather than trying to integrate with the rest of the society. And perhaps for me personally, it was a bit of a surprise that low self-confidence came over and over again in our discussions. So women do not even try to make it outside in their own communities with the idea that, what's the point? I'm wasting time. I'm not going to succeed anyways. If we look at the external factors then, we also all know that prejudices towards some minority groups are very strong, which lead to minority children, for example, being bullied in schools. And this is a direct cause for school dropouts, especially for girls, because parents do not think that it's safe enough to send their girls to schools. We also heard testimonies from minority women being harassed, belittled, treated with a lack of respect in social services and healthcare. So there is definitely a need to to train healthcare workers and social workers to deal with different cultures, different groups in the society. As we also know from various reports, female minority political candidates often also experience harassment and hate speech. But here there is a silver lining as well. Our interviewees mentioned that being a minority woman can also play out for your benefit if quotas are in place and if they work. And once in politics, our interviewees did not report any particular problems because of the minority status, but instead they mentioned that class ceilings affecting all women are a major hindering factor in moving up in the career ladder, be it in decision making or in job markets. And then one final point that I really wanted to mention today is the shrinking space for the civil society, which we know is a severe problem in many OSCE countries, which we see in Europe as well. This is a major factor that affects the most smaller women's organizations and minority women's organizations, which are not that many to begin with. But they have less resources, they have less operational security, and they have no safety nets to protect from intimidation and threats. So the threshold to stop doing what you are doing is very low when your personal safety and security is at stake. And this we saw really concretely in a few countries. I'm moving to recommendations, yes. So this is the final slide. We're running over time a bit. So what should be done? Tackle corruption and work with the governments to create special protection for vulnerable minority women. But the trick here is to know who those vulnerable women are. So we need much more resources to be put in needs assessments and situational analysis to really identify those that are at risk or being left behind in the society. Continue to highlight the situation of minorities to the governments and promote publishing information on public affairs and services in different languages is very important. This builds social cohesion and aids national identity building, which we know is still work in progress in many countries. Population censuses is a very effective way of working on minority women's rights, and I know that many OSCE field missions are working on this topic. Including questions on minority women contributes both to data collection and to situation of minority women positively eventually. I cannot stress enough how important it is to work on gender equality and promoting women's rights in general, because this has spillover effects on minority women as well. We found restrictive legislations for women still in place in many countries. So it is very important that we continue working on this, working on gender equality in general. I will just skip a couple of points here that you can read in the screen, but I would just like to say one final word on conflict resolution. What we also found is that women indeed are not represented in peace and security processes very well. But what was also a very important factor was that very often we do not understand the root causes of conflicts, and often the media and the governments portray them ethnically infused when they are not. So understanding the root causes and addressing them is really important. And in this process, women really have the first-hand information in their communities, often being left alone when their husbands have migrated or being imprisoned, etc. So very simply put, ask minority women's views and their analysis of the situations. I stop here now and look very much forward to the discussion later on. Thanks very much for the time. And I invite you all also to look at the infographic that you will find at your desks, which summarizes the research findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Rina, for presenting the key results and recommendation of the research. Certainly has provided food for thought for the follow-up discussions. We will now go for a coffee break. We are running a little bit over time, so I would kindly ask you to return in 20 minutes. But thank you very much to our Secretary General and the High Commissioner and our colleague from North Macedonia for being with us and for opening this event. Thank you. Coffee break is downstairs on the, just down the Thank you, colleagues. Welcome back. We are now starting the second part of our event, and I'm very happy to introduce our panel of experts. That will help us really go in deeper into a number of points that were raised in the previous section, and to look more specifically at the various aspects and intersections of gender equality and national minorities. Now, our first speaker is connected online. Unfortunately, she could not be with us today. You would have to use your microphones. So, is it online? Yep. Okay. So, our first speaker, I'm really happy to welcome Rita Isaac Diaye. She is the UNDP Senior Advisor on Anti-Racism. She connected with us online. Rita is a globally known human rights expert who has started to work on the protection of the rights of minorities and vulnerable groups after her own experience of prejudice and discrimination due to her Roma origin. She has worked in several countries, including Somalia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, and has been a consultant for the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the ILO, the Office of the UN Secretary General Envoy on Youth, and several international NGOs. She was Chief of Staff in the Hungarian Ministry of Public Administration and Justice. She's a former UN Special Rapporteur on minority issues and a former member and rapporteur of the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Rita, very much welcome with us. Could you hear us?
Yes, thank you. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Rita, for being with us. I have a couple of questions to pose you to kick off these discussions today. First of all, could you share with us your insight on some of the key universal recommendations regarding the effective participation of women belonging to national minorities? Also, the fourth Forum on Minority Issues, the first under your guidance, was dedicated to minority women. And you also work extensively on women, peace and security and youth peace and security and the linkage between the two. Could you reflect on the elements relevant to minority women? Thank you very much, Rita. The screen is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, friends and colleagues. Can you see me? And can you hear me? Thank you. I'm so sorry I can't be with you in person. I actually have COVID and now I'm negative, but I'm a bit down. I'm not out of the woods completely, so I wasn't able to travel. I also need to admit I have a little bit of brain fog still remaining, so please excuse me if I don't sound as structured and concise as one should be. And it's really a pleasure to be here, and I would like to thank the organizers for focusing our meeting on minority women, because I think it is known in this room that minority women often fall into the cracks in between minority rights movements and women's rights movements. The reason for that is that all these marginalized groups are trying to prioritize their own concerns, and they are trying to focus their advocacies into the main areas of discrimination. And so I've been in situations when we try to advocate for Roma women, but we didn't find partners and allies either in the mainstream Roma networks or in women networks. I also remember in the early 2000s that it was so difficult for us Roma women to articulate our own problems because we didn't want to reinforce existing stereotypes. So when we had these debates about how to address early marriages, forced marriages, or domestic violence within the Roma community, we had real difficulties on how to phrase this and how to talk about it, because we were so scared that we will further stigmatize the Roma community itself. So it's really important that we have space and safe platforms to address our issues and to express, of course, our aspirations. And as you mentioned so kindly, Madam Moderator, yes, the fourth Forum on Minority Issues was dedicated to minority women. And I will not go into the details of that forum because you have the entire documentation, which I think are very important resources for this debate. We looked into the situation of minority women in education, political participation, and in social and economic life. And the entire set of recommendations with the speeches and the statements and the contributions, even today, are very valid and relevant. And you can find it, of course, online. Now, as you said at the beginning, I'm a human rights practitioner, but today I am here as a colleague of the United Nations Development Programme. And I was thinking that maybe it would be important for us to connect the dots, because in the United Nations, as we all know, there are several pillars. So human rights is one, peace and security is another one, and development is the third one. And I think that my contribution today would be maybe my best contribution to focus on development, also keeping in mind OSCE's comprehensive concept of security, in which, of course, all these goals around development, which is ending poverty and hunger and discrimination and empowering women, are all very relevant. So having said that, let us remember that all the UN member states, which are also, of course, OSCE participating states, they are members of them, pledged to ensure to leave no one behind and also reach the furthest behind first when we talk about development agendas and how we improve the lives of everybody. And so, of course, in UNDP, we have been trying to trace information and data about how well we are doing and who are the groups who are left most behind. And you will not be surprised, but most of the left behind, and particularly the furthest behind, face intersecting disadvantages stemming from more than one factor. And it's about discrimination, entrenched inequalities, and political and social exclusion. Available data across 16 countries found that the most likely to be left behind are women and girls in rural areas who are born to poor families and belong to minority groups. This population has had the fewest years of education, the highest under 5 child mortality rates, and the least progress in human development over the last few decades. So in this case, of course, the factors that intersect are geographical, social, economical, and they also have to do with identity and discrimination. The more severe and the poverty and inequalities people experience, the more tightly interwoven and enduring such barriers become, and the more vulnerable people become to exploitation and human rights abuses. Let me also bring to your attention a publication that UNDP had 1 year ago. As you may know, there is a systematic collection of multidimensional poverty data. And it looks into 10 indicators around 3 major areas: health, education, and living standards. In 2020-21 cycle, there were 5.2 billion people examined in 109 countries. And so more than 1 in 5 live in multidimensional poverty. Now, the interesting thing is that we try to get disaggregated data by ethnicity and racial categories, and we managed to do it in 40 countries and also by caste in India, covering 291 ethno-racial categories and 5 caste categories. There is no time to introduce the exact findings of this report, but let me just tell you that, bringing examples from other regions, indigenous peoples are the poorest in most Latin American countries. And in India, 5 out of 6 multidimensionally poor people are from lower tribes or castes. And what the major finding in this context is that disparities across ethnic and racial groups are greater than disparities across subnational regions. But we also try to look into gender. So one of the findings is that among the 1.3 billion multidimensionally poor people studied, almost 2/3 live in households in which no female member has completed at least 6 years of schooling. What does it tell us? It tells us how closely interlinked are education and development and poverty in families. And you may also be, you would be interested to know that also in 14 countries covering 1.8 billion people, monetary poverty studies have shown some evidence that female-headed households are less poor than male-headed households. So again, another reason why it's not only a moral obligation to invest into women and minority women, but it's actually economically a very smart idea. So what are the solutions? First of all, we need to acknowledge that addressing intersectionality is not easy. Very often it can be considered as a political action because, of course, it questions status quos and it requires some constructivism, reflexivity, and the deep analysis of power. And also that we question dominant power structures, and we have to overcome general policy approaches. So how we do it? How do we do it? Let me just say 3 action words: examine, empower, and enact. Examine through data. We talked about the lack of disaggregated data, but we need to institutionalize community feedback mechanisms and collect people-centered data. We have to empower minority women by including them into decision-making processes, and we have to enact policies and programs and approaches that would include them. And we heard before at the presentation of how they are just left out from legislation. How do we do that? It's through bringing agency to the fore. The concept of agency and the centrality of agency. What does it mean? It's an approach that stops regarding excluded groups as passive victims and treats them as active movers and participants in social change. And we have to see that eliminating horizontal inequalities is not only a matter of justice, but also enriches communities and society, because agency is central for broader processes of social change. An agency-focused approach also recognizes that people hold multiple identities at once. People are simultaneously members of different collectives, provides for solidarity to be built across groups over shared values and goals. A foundation of agency enhances space for solidarity as people are better able to reason about, strategize, and participate in actions that transform society. And I know my time is up. Unfortunately, I would have a lot to say, but let me just maybe finish with introducing one concept, because I used to work with OSCE, and I know that we have not talked much about human security in the OSCE context. And let me just tell you that in 1994, the human security approach was introduced, and it refocused the security debate from territorial security to people's security. This idea was endorsed by the UN General Assembly in 2012, which invited security scholars and policymakers to look beyond protecting the nation state to protecting what we care most about in our lives, which is our basic needs, our physical integrity, and our human dignity. It emphasized the importance of everyone's right to freedom from fear, freedom from want, and freedom from indignity. It highlighted the close connection among security, development, and the protection and empowerment of individuals and communities. It also lately adds solidarity to the human security strategies after protection and empowerment, and it calls us to hear all voices and enable the agency, both in the description of issues and in policy responses by different communities, because people's plural identities are a source of strength and they enrich personal and social life. And in analyzing experiences of human insecurity and designing policies to tackle them, recognizing intersectionality helps overcome the dangers of masking overlapping identities by acknowledging that ultimately we are all human. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Rita, for being with us. You already pointed out a number of very important points, and I like very much a point that you made regarding the growing need to link the women peace and security, youth peace and security with the development agenda, and the need to invest more in education has been critical in order to be able to empower women including minority women. Now, I'm sure there will be plenty of questions in the Q&A at the end of this session, so I hope you will be able to stay with us, Rita. Now it is a great pleasure for me to move to our second speaker, a colleague, Julia Netesova, the current Chief of Democratic Governance and Gender Unit at ODIHR. Julia has been working, is working with parliaments and political parties on topics of public integrity and accountability, as well as the political participation of women, persons with disabilities, and youth. Before joining ODIHR, Julia was the head of the Human Dimension for the OEC Program Office in Bishkek, and her team, under the guidance, was awarded the OEC Gender Award in 2030 for being able to support the Kyrgyz authorities achieving 30% quota for local councils. So there was truly great results from the field. You also work for the planning office of the EU rule of law in Kosovo. She has a PhD in political science. So thank you for being with us, Julia. I also have for you a couple of questions. First of all, in your work in ODIHR, you promote women empowerment. But from your experience, can you tell us how specific tools can be used to the most vulnerable segments of society, including minority women? And also, could you share with us your experience and observations regarding useful solutions, policies and practices that promote women full participation in society? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Lara, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends of gender equality, dear friends of minority rights. It's a real pleasure to be here. Congratulations to our partners at the HCNM and Gender Issues Program at Secretariat. Very honored to be representing here ODIHR OEC, and very happy to share with you our reflections based on the work that we do in 56 participating states. I will start with some good news before I go into, well, doom and gloom. According to the latest IPU report that is called Women in Parliaments 2022, women's participation in parliaments has never been as diverse and as representative as it is in many countries today. In addition, today, for the first time in history, there is not one parliament in the world that consists only of male politicians. This is good news, and this can also tell you maybe how low are our standards, because we celebrate this. There is very little data on diversity in terms of minority representation, in terms of disability representation. We do have data when it comes to youth. They constitute only 2%, being the largest actually group in the world in terms of electoral votes. If we look into the OEC region, right now, women make up 31% of MPs. This means that some countries are doing better, some countries are doing worse. However, it is definitely progress compared to 1995, the Beijing Platform of Action. At that time, dear colleagues, our organization had 11% of women MPs. So we've come a long way. However, if we go with the same rate, which is 0.5% a year, and considering there are no rollbacks, we will reach gender parity by 2061. This is like mathematics. How do we in ODIHR work to change institutions, to make them gender sensitive, to make them minority sensitive, or sensitive to needs of other identities, groups that represent those communities? I think it is very important to understand that we approach this. Very often we come to the parliaments and our partners say, well, for us, man or woman, it doesn't matter. Everyone is equal. And we say, well, there is an important part missing there. Men and women, majority and minority communities, they are equal in the sense that they have the same rights, access to resources, opportunities, and protections. But men and women, minority and majority communities are different in their needs and interests. So having a gender-blind policy, of course, it's better than discrimination, but it is not actually good, because by having a gender-blind policy where you assume the policy covers everybody, men and women, minority and majority, this policy actually perpetuates the existing gender inequality or minority majority inequality. So we in ODIHR really argue that yes, the laws have to guarantee equal rights, protections, opportunities, resources, but they need to be smart, those policies. They have to know about the needs and interests of different groups and fine-tune the policy. Some communities will not need that much protection. Some will need a lot. So this is where the gender-sensitive or minority-sensitive policy starts to emerge. And this is what is really necessary for minority women. We see that right now in OEC region, there is absence of intersectional perspective on the issues of promotion of women political participation for communities, for non-majority communities. There are no countries with measures that directly address promotion of women from minority groups. What do we have? We have gender-specific tools and we have minority-specific tools. But the research shows that for women from minorities, it's very hard to directly benefit from either. The research shows that very often gender quotas tend to benefit majority women, women from majority communities, while ethnic tools, ethnic advancement tools may tend to benefit men from minority communities. So this is how we kind of need to think, how can we improve the existing setups? And the problem is, of course, when either of those tools are designed, none of them take into consideration realities of women from minority groups. They are designed taking into account different sets of issues that they are trying to address. So this could be potentially as a step forward for we see participating states. However, there are measures. Gender quotas, a lot of states have formal, informal quotas. As for minority-specific quotas, we have states such as Croatia, Hungary, Sweden. We have Cyprus that has specific religious minority communities. For example, if we take Cyprus, it has rules to guarantee representation in the parliament of 3 religious minorities. It's Maronites, Armenians, and Roman Catholics. But again, these are designed in a gender-neutral way. Women can benefit indirectly if they end up on those lists. This is not bad. But there should be gender mainstreaming into those policies as well. And I speak about this a bit more in detail later. I have to put also forward an argument that we're seeing the end of, 2D politics, simplistic politics. If you have a minority woman at the big table, let's say, it doesn't mean that this woman specifically will be representing women or minority. When you want to design a policy that will be inclusive of the voices of women from minority, we say this to every country. You need to think, who are women from minority groups in your country? Who do they represent and who represents them? Because it might not be the case. Sometimes the minority voices of minority women can also be voiced by majority women or minority men. It can be really a very different setup in every country that also changes as the political cycle goes ahead. So we have to be mindful, and what we need to do, we need to have a comprehensive approach to the institutional change. So not just change the law, which is, my dear colleagues, quite easy, as you know, but to look into policies, into practices, into application to the culture, and have this turnover. But we need to understand that women, and there are cases for women politicians, the most notable is Chancellor Merkel, who said, I'm not a feminist. There were expectations that she would be the voice for women, and some women felt left behind, but she has a right as a politician as well to choose what does she want to do as politician. We have politicians with disability who don't want to be, who hide their disability, who don't want to be only politicians for their communities, who want to be delivering for larger constituencies. It is also their right to do so. So in a sense, when we design policy that will promote women with minorities, we also need to have this understanding that once they reach the position of power, they might advance all kinds of topics, which is part of pluralistic democratic society. We need to understand that women from minorities face all the barriers that men face, which is lack of finance, lack of political support, lack of political party networks. Women from minority have the same barriers as women have. So it's domestic chores, violence against women in politics, plus they have an additional set of barriers because they represent minority groups. So if the policy doesn't have any social lifts, doesn't have any channels, the women need to overcome really a big set of multiple barriers. It is very, very difficult, and this is what we try to do in ODIHR, to map those barriers and try to remove them or decrease them to allow access to allow the benefits of the politics of presence, to allow access to decision making. What we also see from our work is, and it was mentioned today, the rural communities, minority communities in rural settings, especially in post-conflict societies, they tend to be isolating and isolated, which means that the roles within those communities become very conservative, including the roles for women. So political participation of those women becomes very challenging, unless, and there are some exceptions, if political maps of municipalities, if they correspond to the boundaries of this community, and there is an obligation to promote women for municipal councils, then women from minority rural communities can participate in politics. This is an, yes, thank you so much, Laura. Sorry if I'm running over time. So in order to include some forward-looking proposals, we would like to suggest designing a specific quota for women and minorities may be problematic. We have a lot of participating states who do not like quotas at all. And maybe we would suggest to enhance the existing mechanisms to mainstream gender into ethnicity policies and to mainstream ethnicity into gender equality policies. I have a lot of examples, but maybe we can discuss this later in the discussion. Run targeted capacity building, empowerment and financial support activities that target only women from minority communities that run for office. Sadly, it is the fix the woman approach rather than fix the system, but we argue for both. And right now in OSCE, there are no states who invest money in this. It's run by civil society in Moldova, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, also in the United States. Then we would suggest to support national minority parties to conduct gender assessments, gender audits. This is what we do. We do gender audits of the parties, and the issue of advancing women in those parties can be put forward. And the last point I would put forward is, of course, address violence against women in politics that minority women face. It's a very complex issue. We have, last year, we published a toolkit that looks into this in a general setting, but of course, looking into more specific topic would be very much necessary. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Julia. Extremely interesting to hear that some good progress was made. It's certainly not enough, which means we need to redouble our effort if you want to make gender parity a reality before 2061. And I think what I picked up is the need from your presentation, the need to develop smart policies that really ensure the effective access and participation of minority women in public life, and the need for specific measures, quota being one possibility, and also of a comprehensive approach, both in policies and practices that really translate access into a reality. So I think there will be opportunities to expand on all these points further on, but thank you very much for your interesting presentation. And it's now my great pleasure to welcome with us Gordana Komic. She's a former MP and has served in the National Assembly of Serbia between 2000 until 2020 as a member of Democratic Party and was Deputy Speaker of the Assembly. She also served as chairperson of the Committee for Foreign Affairs, was a member of the delegation of the National Assembly in the OEC Parliamentary Assembly, and served also as Minister of Human and Minority Rights and Social Dialogue as a member of the Serbian government from 2020 to 2022. Gordana is a founding member of the Women Political Network and has played a very important role in the women's movement in Serbia, having been involved in the battle for equality and representation and participation of women in all decision-making processes in Serbian society. And in October 2019, the 141st IPU General Assembly, in the IPU General Assembly, she was elected for the president of Women Parliamentary Forum. Thank you, Gordana, for being with us today. It's a true honor. From your experience, what would be the main tools to enhance women participation in political, public life, and also the socio-economic life? Can you share some experiences, some food for thoughts from your experience and from the experience of your country in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you, and I can surely try, dear ladies and few very good men. So what would be my suggestion for the future as a tool? Anti-patronizing measure. Because a lot of evil in this planet comes from patronizing. Men patronizing women. And it's good that you are sitting around because women of the planet are minority, not in a number. But because of the gender, we are treated as minority. So it illustrates the fact that in politics, facts are rarely very important. Perception in politics is what takes it all. So that's why I would like to propose some anti-patronizing measures. I was patronizing all my life. There was always some men trying to tell me about the things that I know much better. It's not just mansplaining. Patronizing in much wider approach. And most of the time I leave them. You know, I can't lose time with every fool that I meet in my road. So, but sometimes I'm fed up. So I address him with, I'm physicist by formal education. I'm politician by accident. So I can explain to you the first 3 minutes of the universe in 2 minutes. And I can produce milk with my breasts. What are your magic power that enables you to patronize me? So he doesn't have magic power, of course, but patronizing is a very tempting process. We all patronize. Men patronize women. Women patronize other women. Wealth patronize poor. Majority women patronize minority women. Older people patronize kids. Adult kids patronize their parents. We are a civilization of patronizing instead of communicate. And the women actually for the last 100 years very effectively fought being patronized, saying, no, you will listen to me. You will hear my voice. You don't owe me. I don't have to obey. I don't have to listen. I'm a human being. I want to vote. I want to be employed. I want to be educated. I want to say my word. I want to live this, my moment between two eternities on planet Earth the way I want. And it's not easy for a woman to address society with such a statement. We need support of the society. We need support of the men. Because there is nothing that will be brought as a decision on this planet without men voting for that. So how you push or kindly ask men tend to patronize everything to vote for your anti-patronizing measures. You show them why it is good for them. And that is actually what is going on. What is actually the situation that differs members of minority communities, women from minority communities, and us from majority? It's a using of our power. If we are feminists, and then again, it is good that you're all sitting because you're all feminists. If you are a feminist, you fight for change of power, from power over someone to power for something. It's not the quota that gives you the idea of doing good job where you are posted. It's your beliefs. It's something what you really believe that it is possible to happen. It's your awareness that when you stand up, you're not standing on the floor, on the concrete or whatever. No, in your pretty shoes, you're standing on the shoulders of the women you don't know, who are dead, most of them. But because of something they used to fight patronizing, we are here now, and a few good men as well. So this is something that we need to include in what efforts of OSCE and Office of High Commissioner and all the human rights institutions, it is necessary to introduce or reintroduce that the only strong mechanism in anti-patronizing battle are human rights, not resilience. If this was on TV, it would be beep, 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 resilience. It's about human rights, unplugged and revisited. We took it for granted. It's not for granted. If we don't use it, if we don't talk about it, we will lose it. Who will lose the most? Women. And women that we all share thoughts about it, women on the bottom, as a minority woman and a small minority, as a woman of any position in any society. So why do I fight so strongly and stubbornly? Because I think that the anti-patronizing measures, the first one was quota. They don't want us in politics. Don't get fooled around. He can love you and promise everything, but he does not want you to be in politics. End of story. So quotas are indispensable, and quota for minority women as well, as long as it takes to get it natural. Mother Nature has the only natural quota, it's 50-50. But political perception is that I am 50%, but who cares? I am someone who should listen and be patronized. The second measure that I think should be established is a dialogue, but parity dialogue. We need more few good men around the table to really take seriously issues that minority women go through, that we do not have crossroads with different policies that are supported by excellent institutions and organizations like OAC or HCNM or ODIHR, etc. We need dialogue that men will take seriously. Because, you know, when you express an idea of having such a dialogue, there's famous sentence, it's not the time. You know, right now, it's not the time. It's always the time to fight for human rights. And actually, rules and documents implemented, and I will share with you, if you allow me another minute, how it went on in Serbia when rules and documents about post-conflict societies are in question. I fought for quite a long period of time and lose so far. For example, for governments in Pristina and in Belgrade to have funds to finance entrepreneurship that would be granted with very generous loans with the grace periods, but owners should be two women, one Albanian, one Serbian, and they will have to employ at least two more women. And that is Resolution 3025 in its course. It's ownership, it's women working together, it's minority women within majority, and they fulfill as Albanian living in Serbia or Serb living in Kosovo. They fulfill everything. And you know what's the fun part? The fun part is that if I would be given a cent for every no, you're a lunatic, that I've heard for the last few years, I think Elon Musk would be a poor guy compared to me. But it's a reason not to give up. It's not a reason to explain that it is hard. Of course it is hard. If it's easier, men would do that. That is as simple as that. And why do I think that we should ask women in the ground? Because I did that. And Albanian and Serbian women in Pristina, in Mitrovica, in Belgrade, in Preševo, they don't mind to have opportunity to get a loan and work together. No, we patronize them, saying it's not the time. It's always the time. And now it's my time, and I'm over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordana, for I think it's an extremely stimulating presentation. And I think what you pointed out was also elements that came up in previous presentations. This idea of quota, the fact that there is to be a need for a stronger mechanism to make a change, at least to start with. The importance of dialogue, I think it's extremely important to consider how can we engage men in order to be able to push forward the gender equality, and also the importance of policies and rules. And I think your example clearly highlighted that sometimes we need to think out of the box. Exactly. And outside of the box as much as we can. So thank you very much. I now pass on the floor to our next speaker, Joshua Castellino. He is executive co-director of Minority Rights Group International and the professor of international and comparative law at the University of Derby in the UK. A former journalist in India in the 90s, he completed his PhD in 1998 and worked as a full-time academic for the past 25 years, including as Dean of Law at Middlesex University. He served pro bono on the board of 7 law-oriented organizations around the world, has visiting academic positions at several universities and advisory roles at the Sustainable Development Solution Network, the World Economic Forum, and the African Commission of Human and People's Rights. He has also published extensively 8 books and over 100 academic articles and papers in international law, including the Minority Rights series published by Oxford University Press. Thank you, Joshua, for being with us. I would also have a couple of questions for you. And in particular, based on your extensive experience, could you guide us through some of the practical aspect of intersectional discrimination as a structural problem that needs addressing? And secondly, what would be your recommendations to decision makers and policy makers that derive from the women's movement and could be adapted in minority women context? Thank you, Joshua. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and Your Excellencies. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this really erudite and accomplished panel today. Colleagues, if you think about the process of social exclusion, the fight for minority rights is about 1,000 years old. The fight for gender equality is older than that. Both of those movements were trying to achieve the same thing. Both of those movements were trying to ensure that the inherent dignity and worth of an individual wouldn't be determined by the accident of birth. That essentially, it doesn't matter where you are, who you are, which planet you are, which aim you support, whether you pray looking to the east or west or don't pray at all. Essentially, your inherent dignity and worth is fundamental to being able to create a civilized society. This is not just a moral obligation, colleagues. It's a practical one too. We have an incredible gap in the context of the problem-solving ability of us as humanity because we've excluded populations to start with from our processes. The structures that we see today are entrenched and they are ossified. And breaking those structures down is not going to happen by accident, and it's not going to happen by a gentle process where things change. It has to happen with essentially pre-structured arguments, and it has to happen through interventions that are sharp, that are non-patronizing, I fully agree, but that are based on data and an understanding of what it is that we're trying to solve in the first place. This idea that we can simply sit through and watch the tides of history giving us equality is absolutely flawed because newer kinds of discriminations exist. The patriarchal system that exists is fundamental to the way in which ossified structural discrimination exists in every part of the planet. In addition to that, the attempts by minorities to try and gain rights have also actively left minority women behind. So the context is that you now have a real challenge. If we believe in a system that respects the inherent dignity and worth and allows the potential of every individual on the planet to thrive, minority women are the litmus test. If your measures do not change the plight of minority women, your measures are merely extending the club of privilege. If you really and truly want to try to achieve a society that's egalitarian, that allows the best talents that we have as humanity to come forth without just the accident of birth, then sharp interventions are necessary that fix the inequality gap that persists in every part of life. And to that extent, I really welcome the work done by Dr. Pilke and her colleagues in bringing this issue to the forefront of the OSCE. I think it's really instructive to note how difficult it was to find the data for something that you would think would be well established for a fight that is over 1,000 years old. Yet that data doesn't exist. And a key element has to be, and I fully endorse, and it's a real shame that Rita isn't with us in person, but the 3E policy fully endorsed that, starting off really with the inquiry. It is fundamental that we collect this data in an organized fashion to really understand where the problems lie. The data won't tell you anything new that you don't know. The data shows very clearly that minority women are at the bottom of every single indicator that we see. But the data is not important to reinforce that. It's important as an analysis point for an intervention. Without that data, you cannot design an effective policy. So please do pay attention to that. And I think this baseline study sets the bar now for at least those 4 countries, but more countries are required. And every single country in the world, we need to be able to collect this data on the basis of gender and then further intersections like ethnicity, religion, language, indigeneity, racialized groups, and even disability. In addition to that, and LGBTQI+. Because if we are going to end up with an egalitarian society where we want to put our best talents forth to deal with the big challenges, how do you resolve climate change? How do you get a coronavirus vaccine? We can't do it from the limited perspective of opportunity that's given to children based on the accident of their birth. So my first recommendation really is to encourage you within your states and to encourage the OSCE to take the idea of disaggregated data very, very centrally in trying to understand how it is that intersectional discrimination can be overcome. The SDG process, colleagues, didn't disaggregate data. And that is a major reason why communities are not just left behind. At a minority rights group, we don't talk about communities being left behind. We talk about communities being pushed further behind. The SDG approach to data is almost suggesting that we need to collect the data because there are some people who are being left behind. They imagine that a bus has come that will provide relief and that there are people standing in a queue and what to do. The minority and the minority women happen to be at the bottom of the queue. But that's not the case. There are people who are actively standing, pushing people out of the queue. It's not by accident that this is reproduced in society after society. It's not by accident that structural discrimination is so entrenched within societies. So this is not about some passive leave no one behind. It's about an activity that's pushing communities and minority women further behind and depriving us as humanity of the talents that they might bring to the common challenges that we all face. So disaggregated data is fundamental in terms of that fight. I would encourage also in the work of the High Commissioner for National Minorities to consider the formulation of guidelines on intersectionality. The guidelines that the office has produced over the years in its 30-year history have been very useful for civil society, for governments, for advocates, and for communities in being able to promote minority rights. But there is a gap there too. There is no guideline on intersectionality. And I think one of the serious commitments that I would love to see would be the High Commissioner for National Minorities office taking this challenge on to create guidelines that specifically deal with the impact of structural discrimination on women and other forms of intersectionality. There are also now, from the data perspective, audits possible. We need to do audits by country, by region, and those audits need to be not just on audits to do with inclusion, but also on pay gaps. We get now much more gender inclusion audits, but we don't get those gender inclusion audits to include minority women as a subcategory. It's in those little crevices that Rita talked about earlier. It's into those little crevices that minority women fall. But colleagues, these are not crevices. These are canyons. Because these canyons are ending up letting down humanity and depriving humanity of the full set of attributes that we possess collectively. So it is really fundamental that those gaps are paid attention to and that ultimately the data is collected. But there is no reason why the data can't be collected by minority women themselves. Because the minority women within societies understand the kinds of plights they face, both within their own household and within their communities, where they face discrimination, violence, and various other aspects that Rita talked about in the fight for Roma equality between women and men. But in addition, they face those challenges outside their household in the wider space. Getting minority women to lead the charge, to collect that data, and to put that data at the behest of intergovernmental organizations like the OSCE or state parties or civil society organizations and the various institutions is the first and most crucial step in being able to end entrenched structural discrimination. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joshua, for this extremely inspiring presentation. It took a good point on 3 points that you made are particularly important. Of course, the need for data. And it's good to know that this research that was commissioned and carried out can serve as an important tool to provide at least some of the data that is needed to develop policies and effective policies. Second point on the guidelines. In order to act more efficiently and more effectively to support and empower women belonging to national minorities and audits. I think these are three extremely valuable recommendations, and I'm sure there will be questions on these points from our audience. But before we do move on to the question and answers, I have the pleasure to welcome with us our last speaker, Alexandra Castro. Alexandra, welcome and thank you for being with us. She is a member of the advisory committee on the Framework Convention for the Protection of the National Minorities on behalf of Portugal since 2020. She is an integrated researcher of Dinamius a research unit of the University of Lisbon. She has a PhD in urban anthropology and a master in sociology. And her field of academic and policy expertise are minority rights and human rights-based approaches, intercultural mediation, evaluation of social policies, poverty and social exclusion. Since 2013, she's also a member of the Portuguese Advisory Group for the Integration of Roma Communities, and in 2021, she participated as a member of the Working Group for the Portuguese National Plan to Combat Racism and Discrimination. Alexandra, the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities is one of the most comprehensive treaties that is being designed to protect the rights of persons belonging to national minorities. Now, from your experience, first of all, can you highlight what are the standards and the good practices that are contained within this framework, and in the field of minority women access to economic and social life rights, and also sort of your experience on the implementation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on the behalf of the advisory committee, I would like to thank the kindly invitation to be here. And I have to apologize because for me, it's easier to read my intervention. And I will start with a brief explanation of the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. This convention entered in force in 1998, and it is now in 39 states. Is the first legally binding multilateral instrument devoted to the protection of national minorities. And there are two key principles. One, it is in the Article 1, which states that the protection of national minorities is an integral part of the protection of human rights. And the Article 22, which specifies that the Convention may not be used to reduce existing standards of protection. We have to highlight also the Article 4 because it proclaims the fundamental principles of non-discrimination and equality and makes it clear that the state's obligation may also require affirmative action on the part of the governments. Both the preamble of the Framework Convention and its Article 5 recognize the need to protect the identity of persons belonging to national minorities. And then several provisions between Article 7 to Article 15 set out a framework for how to apply generally applicable human rights. To focus on the access of the national minorities to economic and social rights, we can go to the Article 15. And ratifying states agree, and quoting, creating the conditions necessary for the effective participations of persons belonging to national minority in cultural, social, and economic life and in public affairs. In fact, persons belonging to national minority can only exercise their rights effectively where they are able to participate in these domains. And as we see, that is more than the recognition of rights, it's promote equal access to rights and resources despite the difference. And to highlight the best practice in the field of the minority women access to economic and social rights, I have to mention three levels. The level of the Council of Europe, the level of the impact of the working methods by the Advisory Committee for the protection of national minorities, and the level of recommendations we made in the opinions and the measures implemented by the certain state parties. In the level of the Council of Europe, the gender mainstreaming, it is an inclusive and long-term strategy, which has resulted in a solid legal and policy framework over the years. And the Council of Europe is now following a dual-track approach, which includes specific policies and actions for the realization of gender equality and the promotion, monitoring, coordination, and evaluation of the process of gender mainstreaming in all its politics and programs. The second level of the impact is about the working methods adopted by the Advisory Committee. The Advisory Committee has a long-standing tradition to take into account the specific situation of women belonging to national minority in its opinions. And it is a result of the adoption of certain tools. One of them is the gender equality checklist adopted in 2007 and revised in 2021, and aiming to integrate a gender equality dimension in the monitoring activities in line with the objectives of the Council of Europe Gender Equality Strategy. This checklist of predetermined questions ensure a standardized approach to gender mainstreaming. It proposes key issues and questions that should be addressed by the Advisory Committee in preparation of and during country visits and in the drafting the opinions. The checklist takes into consideration this central issue through the monitoring process, but also in the composition of the group of experts themselves, their bureau, and their working groups. Another tool are the thematic commentaries. And over the years, the Advisory Committee has developed a certain jurisprudence, and the compilation of this jurisprudence is in the thematic commentaries. And this shows how the Framework Convention can best be applied in practice. And in the second thematic commentaries on the effective participation of persons belonging to national minorities in cultural, social, and economic life and in public affairs, it was adopted in 2008, the Advisory Committee indicates that effective participation in socio-economic life requires the existence of comprehensive legislation prohibiting discrimination on ethnic grounds by public and private actors. This legislation should extend to employment, housing, healthcare, and social protection. It is also important that appropriate legal remedies are available in case of discrimination, and that particular attention is paid to multiple discrimination against women belonging to national minorities. There is also the important role of the Gender Equality Rapporteur
And it is one of my tasks in the advisory committee now. And it is serve as a gender mainstreaming ambassador, ensuring that the gender equality perspective is introduced into the activities and policy of the advisory committee or monitoring process. It is most of all about promoting a change in approach, which does not imply a requirement to embark on new activities. Another issue important is the composition of the advisory committee. And the gender balance in the monitoring visits is very important in the accessibility to the information as well as its quality, because it depends on the type of relationship established with some minorities. And because we know that with some minorities, the gender is important to have more confidence. For example, last year when we go to a monitoring visit in UK, only me and another woman were invited to enter in 2 travel Roma caravans to talk with 2 women. And the information gathered justify how important it is to have women in this delegation. Another issue in the composition is the academic background, because it's very important to the understanding the intersectionality of gender and that ethnicity. And here, the notion of cultural relativism and a non-ethnocentric approach are crucial in all the phases of the monitoring process. This means that we have to be in mind that beliefs, values, and practice of a culture should be understood within the context of that culture, rather than being judged according to the standard of another culture. It does not mean that all cultural practices are equal, valid, or desirable, but rather that they should be evaluated within their own social and cultural context. And now I arrive at the 3rd level of best practice, namely the type of recommendations we made in the opinions and the measures implemented by certain state parties. In this sense, and to give a concrete example, in last opinions, we try to combat the stereotype that early marriage are a cultural practice. And in the recommendations, we go forward, not only collect the data on gender-based violence, but we emphasize the need to understand the historical context and to carry out a good diagnosis that identify the causes and difference within territories and families. The policies and measures to prevent and combat this issue should be evidence-based and be engaging closely with law enforcement and social service, and with the participation of national minorities. They should also aim at providing community care for vulnerable persons. And this is only one example of how we can design more smart recommendations. We note that in rural areas, the participation of women in public life may be more challenging due to the lack of resources, but also the lack of approval by members of family. This social pressure is detrimental to self-confidence and often results in women limiting their ambition in education and even employment. In the advisory committee opinions, there are more and more reference to the need of target measures to remedy specific forms of discrimination faced by women belonging to national minorities, and also the need of studies to assess the impact of some programs and projects. However, it is true that such references are often made in relation to the situation of the Roma community. The gender dimensions of social exclusion are an important issue to explore. As we emphasize in the thematic commentary number 2, we need to improve the knowledge based on the evidence to understand the key determinants of gender gaps among the national minorities, namely in the Roman population and in the Presid region. Analyzing them allow us to tackle them efficiently. As a way to conclude, I select some examples of good practice adopted by the state parties that could be applied in other countries. Namely, studies on the housing, education, and health situation of Roma girls and women allow to strengthen the knowledge and adopt more adequate measures. Many Roma national strategies focus on the inclusion of women and girls, as this holds a higher potential to address specific problems experienced by these persons due to the intersectionality of gender and ethnicity. However, it does not mean that they are properly or at all implemented. Investing in the education by offering scholarship for young Roma women and girls will create in the short term positive women Roma role models and lead to the creation of a new generation of women Roma leaders able to take part more actively in socioeconomic life and in decision making at local and national levels. The recruitment of Roma women in the police force facilitates also the access to justice of women suffering violence. The several mediate programs in the municipalities, in the health and education system promote the inclusion of women in the labor market and facilitate access to the opportunities. The support of Roma women informal career, helping to reach a better balance between professional and private life. Some rehousing programs also improve the conditions and have an impact in the access to education, to health and labor market. These are only seven. This is only 7 examples of good practice adopted by state parties and for the Roma women. But the Roma communities, it's the most. We have the most reference in the about Roma community. And sorry to focus the best practice, but in fact it is the focus of the opinions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for your very comprehensive presentation of some of the key tools that are available, some of the recommendations, but are also important that you brought up some of the best practices. They've been identified as these potentially can be replicated in other contexts, given the fact that they've been successful. Now, I think, yes, we are doing very well with time. I would like to now open the floor for question and answers. We have approximately 25 minutes. I would kindly ask you to introduce yourself and also keep your comments or question very brief, no more than 1 minute, to allow for as many questions as possible. Please.
Hi, thank you. I am Kathleen Samuel from the U.S. delegation. And first, I'd like to thank the WIN program and the High Commissioner's Office for organizing a very excellent event. And I would, it's given us a lot of food for thought. And I would second the comment about developing this brochure that you've given us into a set of recommendations for participating states in some of the best practices on intersectionality. One of the areas that I think warrants more attention and hasn't been touched on very directly today, so I'd be interested in hearing feedback from our speakers, is intersectionality among forcibly displaced populations or populations that are under occupation. And I'm thinking in particular about the large numbers of women and children from Ukraine that have been forcibly displaced because of military aggression. When seeking shelter in third countries, what are some of the best practices that we can employ in ensuring that minority women also have access to services, and as well as helping develop agency? And so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Is there any other questions? Then perhaps I pass on to the experts to refugees and migrants. Serbia treated migrants and refugees during 2015 from the points of human rights. And it rarely happened anywhere else. And that's my answer to you for Ukraine refugees, because in developed world, among wealthy countries, as well as in some of transition democracies, we erased the difference between refugee and the migrant. Refugees does not have a choice. Those Ukrainian women and children, they don't have a choice. If they stay where they are, they will be dead. I
witnessed almost 300,000 people of that kind back in early 90s in my city of Novi Sad. They were refugees. And if you don't treat them from the point of human rights, then you enlarge the tragedy they're living in. Migrants are something different. Migrants are people who are choosing to live somewhere else for better life. What I highly criticize is that it starts to be taken like a criminal offense. You know, we don't need these migrants. They will harm our culture. That is a very dangerous thing. And I do hope that whoever is responsible for Ukraine people who have their sanctuaries, mostly in neighboring countries, but we have back home a lot of Ukraine refugees as well, that will never forget to treat them from the point of human rights. It is very, very hard. As a member of OSCE Third Committee, I've been in the border of Macedonia and Serbia at the time. And I was privileged to see Serbian police and army who were there in shelters for months, trying to make decent days for people who were traveling on foot as refugees and migrants, and register them, and then give them opportunity to go to the countries where they moved, because they didn't want to stay in Serbia. Only a few of us lunatics adore Serbia and live in Serbia. They wanted to go to Germany and Scandinavia, etc. I don't know what will happen with Ukraine children and women who are forced due to the aggression to leave their homes. But I think that OSCE must arrange a psychological support for them, because I was there as a listener, and most of these women said, I just want to go home. They want to go home, but there is no home. And there is a little what you can do as a listener. It's not just about feeding them and giving them a clean bath or religious comfort. It's about showing them that there is a life after a massacre or a tragedy they witnessed, or the evil that was spread around their country that causes them to leave their homes. It's up to OSCE.
So to build on what was said before by my colleague here, I think with the specific situation of Ukraine, we have sort of a golden opportunity, if you can describe the situation as such. But I think we have learned a lot from the previous conflicts as well. What we found out in our study, in the very limited scope that it had, the situation becomes chronic very quickly, and there are still informal settlements in the Balkan area that were camps previously, refugee camps. The camps have been dismantled many years ago, but people have stayed on living in those areas because they didn't have anywhere else to go to. But I think that this is not necessarily, I don't see this as a situation necessarily with the Ukrainian case specifically. We've seen in many EU member states where Ukrainians have come that there have been many organizations, including the government, that have tried to offer jobs, offer decent life for the Ukrainians from the beginning. So I think integration from the beginning is the key to make life meaningful wherever that is. In that sense, I think camps are a bit of a risky business, but of course necessary.
For a short period of time.
Short period of time, exactly. That's the key here. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gorica, please.
Thank you very much, Lara. Thank you all. First of all, allow me to once again, in the name of the chairpersonship, commend the High Commissioner for National Minorities in the Gender section for, as Lara said, putting this very important topic to the fore for the first time. It's really I regard it as a breakthrough, and very much welcome the research done by both institutions. Of course, as we said, the chairpersonship strongly supports this. And actually, I come from a country where we still have a long way to go, but we have gone a long way, actually. And this, I think, can be confirmed by all the institutions sitting on the table. And actually, we are currently implementing a strategy, One Society for All, which does integrate and has intersectional approaches to equality and also integrating gender aspects. And we are actually also working with the Council of Europe on our Rome action plan on integrating gender and national minority, underlining the Roma ethnic minority as the most vulnerable one. My question will be about the intersectionality and gender and national minorities discrimination in social media. Basically, I see this as a very important further area for further action, because this is where we, at least in the context of my society, we are very much witnesses of ongoing discrimination on a daily basis. So how to combat this? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Gorica. Very nice to see you, and thanks a lot for the support from chairpersonship to important topic of gender equality, of advancement of women. We in ODIHR and in my unit appreciate it really a lot. Indeed, I did have North Macedonia as one of the good examples, and just colleagues to share with you in the current convocation, out of 50 women, there is one Bosniak woman, one Roma woman, one Jewish woman, and 10 Albanian women sitting in the parliament of North Macedonia. And this was done thanks to the proactive work of political parties putting women on the list in line within the quota spaces. Yes, they gave the places also to women from minorities, and this is to be definitely applauded. When it comes to the online violence, ODIHR has initiated work on violence against women in politics last year. We developed a comprehensive toolkit that looks into what parliaments can do, what political parties can do, what can be done by civil society and women politicians themselves. And through our research, what we found out also that women with multiple identities, women with disabilities, women of ethnic minority or different sexual identities, they receive a disproportional amount of abuse. I was very surprised to hear Rina today saying she had a different conclusion in your research. And it's very good to hear that there are examples where women from minorities can make it to politics and not experience that wave of abuse. We see that women in politics are targeted not because of their political views. It's not because of left or right, it's because they are women. The comments are done related to their appearances, their looks, what they wear. And apologies for citing Chancellor Merkel again, but she once said, a man can wear the same suit for a month. When I wear the same jacket twice, citizens start writing to me. Am I doing fine? I mean, this is a very light interest into looks. There is way perverse one. Violence can be highly sexualized that women politicians receive. Threats of rape are paramount. And of course, racial slur, if the woman comes from a minority background based on existing stereotypes that women find very, very harmful. It is now emerging as a main barrier for young women to join the politics. You know, the new generation, they're very aware of, they have healthier boundaries. They are way more aware of mental health issues. And they say, well, do I need that amount of abuse? And it becomes one of the main barriers now. And absolutely something needs to be done. It's a very difficult issue to regulate because you step into the topic of freedom of speech. And you also step into the area where this violence is perpetrated in social media that are private companies, that are multinational corporations. And there are some attempts to do it, but there are no best practices so far. However, we recommend that political parties start in adding this to their codes of conduct, condemning violence against politicians in their ranks, that parliaments do the same, that code of conduct and rules of procedure specifically forbid this, and then that there is a systematic training and awareness raising on this so that the culture of integrity is there, and the culture where it's not permitted, it's not allowed, is created. It cannot be done overnight, not even in a year, but we see this is the main way to go about this. Thank you very much.
You, Julia, anyone else would like
Can
to?
I have a brief personal story?
Very briefly, just to try to make you laugh on social media harassment, you know. Many times I was told that I am fat and ugly. And I said, of course I'm fat and ugly, but why do you care? You won't cook me to eat me, and you most certainly will not marry me. So what's the point? It is to address in social media or in real life to the cause of verbal violence and verbal garbage that is thrown to you. It's a fear. So whenever you address a fear for the perpetrator, you win. And it's good for him. It's like in physical domestic violence, when you as a victim says, no, it will not go further anymore. That is how violence stops. And social media violence it's a very poison. It's a very hard something to be, especially for younger women, because they take it seriously. Come on. Some lunatic, digital, mimage, you take seriously? No. You learn how to address his fear. If he's a troll, if he's a hybrid paid, he will disappear. If he's someone you know, it will be very obvious. And you can again say, of course I'm ugly. It's lovely to be ugly.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to highlight that there are a number of guidelines now around that are dealing with this, but this social media context is really happening in the face of growing nationalism, and that growing nationalism is using scapegoating. So your artificial majorities are being created by pointing to a minority, and this is happening in political parties, and this is happening in political parties who are getting to government. So this is not something that is, you know, a lone troll only out there who's harassing a lone woman minority. This is happening from parliaments. This is happening from political parties. It's happening on national television stations. And I think a code of conduct is fundamental to it. And I love the idea of that Julia is talking about in terms of a code of conduct for political parties to eliminate this scourge. Because this attempt to create artificial majority to be able to win an election is having serious impact. And women minorities are absolutely the main tool of that aggression. It's to do with also the political will to regulate corporations. The freedom of expression is an excuse to do nothing. So I think we need to really address that political will question if we're going to solve this issue.
Thank you so much. My name is Elżbieta Kuzborska. I'm from the Office of High Commissioner on National Minorities. And I would like to indeed compliment all the presentations and discussion around the issue of intersectionality. I have a feeling that we all also there were a lot of comments about empowering women, young women and women in general. And my question is to the speakers, what would be your three main indicators or three main recommendations to policymakers or decision makers that would empower women, be it in the public life or be it in socioeconomic sphere? Thank you.
I can start. Well, we need to look at the system. As I mentioned this in my presentation, we need to try to fix the system in a sense to develop smarter, more sensitive policies for a start. So the field should be more inclusive to allow for more representation, because these are two different things as well. Institutions can be inclusive but not representative, can be representative but not inclusive. So to have institutional change with a view to give a plurality of voices, a plurality of lived experiences. And we need to understand that if for women, we are talking now about equality of results, for women in general. For women, minority women, we're still talking about equality of opportunities. Because different communities, they go at different speeds. The same is true for persons with disabilities. We're still demanding equality of opportunities, not yet equality of results. So we need to be mindful of this, of how different communities go at different speeds and might need different measures that would remove the barriers. The second one would be, I mean, I hated to say, you know, fix the women, but give opportunities to women from minorities to be in charge, also to reduce the passive position, to increase the agency. Lack of confidence is widely cited in many opinion polls because it comes from lack of knowledge and structural inequality that those women experience. So there is definitely a need for women-centered activities, so system-centered, women-centered. And the third one, I will repeat myself, it's violence against women in politics for minority groups. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm pretty much repeating what Julia was saying here, but I think that very often there is no magic to it. How many of us can say that we ask minority women? So give them the floor, give them the opportunity to share their opinions. I think that's super important. And the other thing is that what we see in Europe, in many countries in Europe and all over, youth is not necessarily interested in political affairs anymore. So it's also important to include civic education in schools so that an individual makes the connection of politics to his or her own situation. So these would be my two main recommendations.
As a lawmaker for quite a period of time and a member of government for quite a period of time, I have one principle, not three. It's policies that are women friendly. You have to take care of any article of the law, any law. What does it mean for me as a woman? This law is enforced. How do I feel when I leave my apartment? And if you give the ex ante analysis that I will feel that I am stepping in friendly environment, then it's a good law. So if we knew how to make even environmental friendly law, and we do, it's obvious, with some lunatics that started 30, 40 years ago, stop polluting and try to take care of environment. So what stops any government to make women-friendly laws? It is good for all of society.
I would say that 3 for me would be participate first, second test, and third correct. And if you can if you can get that cycle as early as possible, you can break the cycle of exclusion.
We have room for one more question. Do you want to intervene? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm from Georgian Mission here in Vienna, Ialomice. Thank you, the panelists and organizers of this event. And as High Commissioner said, indeed, it was such provoking, I think, for all of us. So thank you for this. Maybe partly my question, because I'm the last one, so was maybe answered partly, but maybe there is something to elaborate on. So I will take this floor, and I have a question specifically on the research which was presented, Rina, by you, and so we saw only slides of this, and so the last slide specifically, which focused on what should be done, and I think for all of us, this is the most important part. I mean, what we should focus, what government should focus on, and etc. So, but at the same time, I think. Most of the countries, so between the lines, will already see the efforts they are doing in all the directions and the projects they are addressing and so forth. For example, in case of Georgia, and so of course I will not go deeper because Georgia was one of the focus countries in your study in the research, and you have the full information, but so we have a state strategy for equality and civic integration, a 10-year strategy, and there are a bunch of programs and projects which are implemented, and these are not short-term programs, I would say. They are long-term programs with a long-term commitment to address the issue, and this is very important. And when we already have the programs in place, it means that the problem itself was identified and the need to address them. So this is a very important phase, I think, I mean, in the whole of this cycle. For example, women economic empowerment, there are specific projects for minority women, not only women, but for minority women, like trainings, to help them, support them, to start their business and entrepreneurship. The information that you also focus in the slides and in the research. I mean, there is a huge door-to-door campaign in Georgia. I would say within the 2 years course, it was more than 200 meetings in 66 villages of the 5 regions, so densely populated with the minorities. So, of course, I will not go deeper. So my question is, because we can read, you know, between the lines, all the efforts governments are putting and all the programs. So are there any more specific recommendations maybe envisaged in the research? I understand that the focus was only 4 countries and it has some reservations and limitations. I mean, because you have to generalize the problem. But anyways, I mean, if there are, or maybe does it also focus on some good practices? I mean, not only challenges, but good practices as well, just to, it will be interesting to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm actually very happy to answer to this one because Georgia was among the easier countries to find information on the situation of minority women. And I know that there are also many NGOs that work a lot on this topic. In the case of Georgia, a specific good practice example that was mentioned by our interviewees was the scholarship program for young minority girls, which has enabled many girls to follow education all the way to the university. So definitely something to be continued and replicated in other countries as well. Then another good practice example, specifically from Georgia, was the power of working with the parents. And I'm actually happy to take this up because a lot of what we're talking about today is about attitude change. It's not about magic bullets. It's about changing our attitudes towards people, and parents are in key position in that. And this might sound a little bit off OSCE agenda. I agree that it is not. So one of the key things for me would be to strengthen collaboration between different organizations with different strengths. And a couple of examples come to my mind here. UN Women and UNICEF, who have both done excellent work in their own corners on children's rights, on minority girls' rights, and also women in peace and security. So teaming up with organizations, pooling resources, increases effectiveness, and it increases leverage in the long run.
Okay, thank you very much, Rina, pointing out also very important, teaming up with other international organizations. Internal and external coordination is fundamental to achieve results. We have reached the end of this event. Incredibly, I found it incredibly thought-provoking. And I would like really thank our experts for sharing their experiences, but also sharing very concrete recommendations that will inform our work. And also a special thanks to the High Commissioner and his staff for the really excellent cooperation. We are really happy we were able to do this together, do this jointly. And personally, I look forward to more to come. But High Commissioner, I now would like to pass on the floor to you for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you to you, dear Lara, also on behalf of all our entire community for such excellent moderation and leading our discussions. I join you in my thanks to my team, to all participants, to our distinguished speakers. In fact, we have quite a unique group of speakers, as you may notice, combining representatives of obviously of our honorable chair, our distinguished organization, as well as representatives of participating states, academia, civil society, international organizations, our reliable partners. So we are thankful to all of you for spending some time here in Vienna with us. It was very informative, constructive, very much open dialogue, which we witnessed this morning. Obviously, we have to address challenges minority women face today. I personally and my team obviously learned a lot from what we hear on your behalf. The experience of our distinguished speakers also have helped us in addressing some of challenges minority women face. So my office toolbox is very much enriched after this meeting. It was even concrete suggestion to pay more, probably to be a bit more pragmatic and to work on new set of recommendation, which will also cover issues which we discussed today. From finding of this very research and insights shared by both by speakers and also during your interventions, distinguished participants, it is clear that this issue is very much complex, it's multifaceted, and often very much difficult to dissect. That is why responses should be, to extent possible, multi-layered. And first and foremost, the response we expected on behalf of democratically elected governments. So we are talking today also about, and it was also mentioned, about good examples and best practices. In fact, after my visits to quite a number of participating states, I'm even more convinced that legislation, when it comes to the protection of the interests and rights of national minorities, if not perfect, but quite solid enough. And in most of participating states, we witness quite a robust, I would say, approach and provisions in the legislative framework within which above mentioned democratically elected governments operating today. But the matter is on implementation. I mean, I stressed upon this morning notion of opportunities, but implementation, this is area where we really have to invest. And this morning, every morning we receiving quite sad news from different frontiers. But this morning, the best news I received from my capital of Kazakhstan, because of the recent parliamentary elections. This morning, political parties presented their distinguished members of our newly elected parliament. And I, with quite a deep satisfaction, noticed that there were many women's names in the party lists with explanation, with comments that it's according to the gender quota. Because as far as I know, in my country, there is a gender and youth quota of 30%. In any elected body, 30% of seats allocated either for women or for youth. So, and I am very curious how it will look, this parliamentary hold tomorrow when the new group of MPs are going to have their first meeting. So I will scrutinize, obviously, thoroughly, statistically, how many women and youth will be in our new parliament. Thank you also for raising some issues related to how we treat women and youth, those who escape in conflict zones. All these, I personally was quite impressed last year, meeting here in Vienna at one of the events, young Roma women of student age, arriving from Kharkiv and Mariupol areas affected by this warfare, as you know. On the other side, in Austria, Finland, which I revisited recently, Lithuania, Estonia, Georgia, these countries providing quite a very special program of integration of women arriving to their countries. And this is also, in spite of tragic circumstances, quite a good examples and best practices which deserve to be disseminated. So cooperation within and between participating states as well as multilateral structures is a key element in the way of implementing of our commitments. And I hope that with this research project, albeit limited in scope, we have managed to show and to demonstrate joint commitment of the OSCE in conjunction and in cooperation, in partnership with other relevant international organizations, Council of Europe, funds, agencies, programs of the United Nations in particular. So we're demonstrating how we are united in addressing dynamics of exclusion and discrimination, and while contributing some knowledge to support responses. And it is obviously only a start, but one that I'm particularly proud of. Again, many thanks to our teams here in the OEC and in other our partner organizations. So in fact, I mentioned to you that today we are also mentioning the 30th anniversary of opening of the office in The Hague. So please, in front of you, you have some modest token of appreciation. Feel free to collect them to your collection of various gifts, but 30th anniversary of also giving us a chance to reflect on our undisputable achievements and many breakthroughs to that end. But on the other side, I remind you what my first distinguished predecessor, Honorable Max van der Stoel, the prominent Dutch statesman, called us for. He asked us to be imaginative and creative while meeting these challenges national minorities, and in our particular case, minority women facing. That's why let's unite our efforts, and I'm looking forward to reinforcing our partnership with all our partners of the OEC, within OEC and beyond. Thank you very much for your presence, and welcome. Please support by concrete actions, and this my address. I'm calling on governments. Please do demonstrate your commitment. Sadly, sometimes we are dependent on outcome of elections, but this is my motto, and if you will, a sort of credo, we should devote particular attention to the interests of national minorities and minority women, irrespective to the outcome of any elections. So whatever is said, whatever is written, whatever commitments we taken under OEC of our organization should be respected, and we should demonstrate political will to support national minorities. Thank you very much.